So, yesterday, seemingly out of nowhere, the lovely folks at Valve made 6 in-progress heroes accessible via a new form of matchmaking called Hero Labs. Because of the fact Hero Labs is only open for 2 hours late at night for me personally, I haven't had much time to really play all of these new characters and gather my thoughts on their kits and what they might offer to Deadlock as a whole. What I can offer that isn't time sensitive is my thoughts on the lore that is brought with them and their addition to the Heroes tab within the game's main menus. We've known about a few of these characters for a while now. Characters like Calico and Holiday, they've been accessible via the console for a good while now. But what hasn't been accessible, to my knowledge at least, is the lore that has been written for these characters. That is, until yesterday, or the 24th of October 2024, whenever this is getting officially uploaded. First off is Calico. I would say there are two major things we can glean from the lore that is introduced with Calico. So, number one is obviously the fact that they are labeled Time Magazine's most dangerous woman alive. We didn't know before this that Time Magazine was still a thing in this universe, so obviously some things have developed similarly to our own world despite the presence of magic within Deadlock's universe. Number two is the fact that Calico is referred to as an occult arms dealer. We knew before this with McGinnis's character that the war machine of the industrial military complex had started to incorporate magic under its influence as a tool for destruction. What we didn't know is that other industries had started to pop up surrounding this, and that Calico is apparently a well-known figure when it comes to the selling and moving around of these magic-based arms. Fathom, formerly known as Slork, introduces some pretty interesting lore that matches up with something we already got with Viscus. We knew before, with Viscus's background name-dropping Nessie, that the oceans of the Deadlock universe contain cryptids and other various mythological creatures. Something known as the Adversary has popped up within recent memory and has started hunting all of these creatures, causing both Fathom and Viscus to rise to the surface in order to gain the patron's favor as a means of repelling this thing. The most we directly get on what the Adversary is that Fathom's background describes it as a genocidal force of nature. Viscus's background adds on to this by calling it something dark and predatory. We can conclude as a result that probably because of the most recent maelstrom in memory, something has spawned into Earth's oceans referred to as the Deep and has begun disrupting the natural order of things. Whatever the Adversary is, the only thing that seems to be able to push it back is summoning the patrons and utilizing their supernatural godly abilities. Viper is a creep, Viper is a freak, Viper is a weirdo. Viper has apparently gotten themselves thrown in prison several times now, but they've also escaped several times now. I'm gonna be real, there's not really much for me to work with here. Viper seems cool. If there's any sort of lore that they are specifically going to give us that is new, it is probably going to involve things about the lower level of New York City's crime underbelly. We're aware, for example, of the underground fight club that characters like Lash and Bebop participate in, or the Mendoza Syndicate, which Wraith is a part of, and Ivy ran out of southern Harlem when they initially awoke. Otherwise, all Viper's written lore tells us is that they are a low-level criminal in New York's overall criminal underbelly. Anything else we get will probably come from voice lines when they are added to the character. While there's not much that immediately interests me about Viper's background at the moment, what does interest me is just the fact that the Deadlock crew is willing to add more monsters. You know, it's cool to see more weirdos, more freaks. So, Recker is a figure in the military-industrial complex for Deadlock's universe, specifically the paranormal side that emerged after the most recent Maelstrom introduced magic to the broader population. Recker specifically is employed by Eldritch Tactical Solutions, which is a subsidiary of Fairfax Industries, which is the company that McGinnis is employed under to make their soul-based weaponry. It seems that paranormal soldiers like Recker are employed by certain shady bodies in order to circumvent the prophetic sort of prevention measures that the world's governments have begun to implement using the now commonly accessible magic. Recker specifically is a very hard character to comment on, not necessarily because their lore isn't cemented, but because it's hard to intuit further aspects of their background that their design might get across. Simply put, while I don't think the lore behind them is subject to change, I do think that their future design will play into it a lot more, and because their design is currently a placeholder, I really cannot speak to that element of it. It's all kind of up in the air with these characters in progress, but Recker specifically is one of the most unfinished when it comes to their final shape and general idea. All that said, it is very interesting to get more characters that exemplify the idea of future warfare and how magic factors into the way world governments navigate geopolitics. Magician was a very out of left field addition for me personally, considering having poked around the console for a little bit beforehand, they weren't visible at all there, or at least they weren't accessible until they were made publicly available on this most recent update. Magician's character is foundationally that they are a set of lovers who bound their souls together, died during a stage performance, and are now fighting to get a magical divorce because they are just so tired of each other. Their design is visibly a placeholder. I believe it is a retooled version of one of Wraith's designs from back when Deadlock was called Neon Prime. I don't know if the mannequin-esque aesthetic of the current design will be brought over, but I do like how the current background almost implies that it will be two souls possessing one body. Magician's lore doesn't really teach us anything new besides for the presence of soul-binding magic within the universe. That said, their character premise is a very welcome addition to the bright cast of faces that Deadlock has. Holiday is a small-town sheriff with a bone to pick against a supernatural serial killer. While the name Troubadour that they were given directly refers to the fact that they were a folk singer, the origin of the term troubadour in general comes from a class of lyric poets and poet-musicians whose major theme was courtly love. Courtly love being defined as a kind of love that is not physical in nature, more based in flirting, dancing, and showcases of chivalry. Which, all things considered, is a very strange name to give to a serial killer. And it makes me wonder if there's any further characterization for this troubadour that we could get in the future to explain why this name was granted to them. Obviously, this lore introduces to us the idea that people can turn into flocks of birds. We don't know the specific magic behind that, but it does exist. Holiday being a somewhat traditional Rudy-Tooty shooting cowboy kind of character almost implies that there's a Wild West element to the world outside of the immediate area we see in the game. I don't know if her stomping grounds of Illinois are meant to be like a Wild West wasteland, but it is funny to imagine that. Not much is directly implied about any broad dynamics that Holiday might have with other characters in the universe. That would ultimately have to come down to examining her voice lines and interactions with other characters.